All right, ready to dive in. Today, we're tackling a tough one, a real tragedy. The bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland. We've been through a ton of research on this, the event, the investigation, the aftermath. It's a lot to unpack, but we're here to make sense of it all.
And, it's amazing how even decades later, this event still resonates. It wasn't just a tragedy. It really was a turning point. It forced the world to rethink, everything about aviation security and really confront, the realities of international terrorism.
Absolutely. But let's rewind for a second. Back to December 21st, 1988, just a few days before Christmas. Picture it. Pan Am Flight 103, a Boeing 747, takes off from London. Everyone on board is excited, right? Families heading home for the holidays, students ready for the break, dreams of Christmas in New York City.
And meanwhile, over in Lockerbie, Scotland, it's just a normal evening. Peaceful, quiet. People are home, finishing up dinner, maybe watching some TV, a typical winter night. And then out of nowhere, the sky just erupts. Can you imagine? This horrifying explosion, burning debris raining down from the sky. Chaos, utter chaos.
270 lives were lost that night. Everyone on board, plus 11 people on the ground in Lockerbie. And among the passengers, a group of 35 students from Syracuse University on their way home after a semester abroad. Just heartbreaking.
It really shook the Syracuse community, the whole university. These weren't just names on a list. They were young people, so full of potential. The chancellor at the time said they were some of our best and brightest, which makes it even more tragic,
It's hard to fathom. And the thing is, what everyone initially thought was this terrible accident, well, it quickly became clear that something far more sinister had happened. As investigators started digging in, they uncovered the truth. This wasn't an accident at all. This was a deliberate act of terrorism. And that realization, that's what launched this massive, unprecedented investigation.
And it really was unprecedented. Britain's largest ever criminal inquiry, and get this, it was led by their smallest police force, the Dumfries and Galloway Constabulary. Talk about pressure.
I can't even imagine. And the crime scene itself was just massive. A debris field stretching over 845 square miles.
Yeah.
845 square miles. How do you even begin to process that?
It's mind-boggling. But the investigators, they faced that challenge head-on. They were incredibly meticulous, recovering over 4 million, you heard that right, 4 million pieces of wreckage. They were told to literally collect anything that isn't growing and isn't a rock. That's dedication.
And it paid off, right? It took 3 years, but they started finding those crucial pieces of the puzzle. Traces of explosives, a fragment of a timer, even tiny pieces of clothing. Turns out those would be more important than anyone could have imagined.
Those tiny fragments, they were like whispers hidden among the wreckage. But how do you even begin to solve something like this? It's like finding a needle in a haystack. But the haystack is spread out over hundreds of miles.
It's true. It's like trying to put together this giant, tragic jigsaw puzzle, but the wind blew all the pieces everywhere. But here's where things take a turn. One of those clothing fragments, just a simple piece of cloth, it held a secret, a label that said, "Made in Malta."
And that tiny detail, my friend, that's the thread that would unravel this whole global conspiracy.
Malta. Wow. Okay, didn't see that coming. A tiny island in the Mediterranean. What's the connection to a bombing over Scotland?
It all goes back to that clothing label, Made in Malta. Remember those fragments? The blue baby girl jumpsuit, the brown slalom shirt, the Yorkie trousers.
Right, the clothes.
Well, those fragments led investigators straight to a shop in Malta, Mary's house. A clothing shop.
So they're on the hunt for a shopper in Malta. Find anything.
They did. The shop owner, Tony Gauci, he was incredible, had this amazing memory.
Really?
Oh, yeah. He remembered selling those exact items weeks before the bombing. Brands, sizes, everything.
Wow, talk about a lucky break.
Yeah.
But who was this guy? Did Gauci recognize him?
He did. Described him as Libyan, even helped police create a sketch. That was huge. Connected the clothes, potentially the bomb, to Libya, but there's more. Remember all those pieces of wreckage?
Yeah, millions of them. Right?
Millions. Well, among them, a piece of luggage, loaded onto the plane in Malta.
Hold on. This luggage wasn't checked in by a passenger. Like, it wasn't supposed to be on that flight.
We got it. An unaccompanied bag. Originated in Malta, tagged for transfer, ended up on Pan Am 103.
That's unsettling. How does a bag from Malta just end up on a flight from London to New York?
Back then. The baggage system, not nearly as secure. Tag a bag right, it could be routed through multiple airports, no problem. No passenger required.
Wow. So this whole thing exposed a major flaw in the system, basically.
It did. A tragic reminder of how things worked back then.
And this unaccompanied bag? I'm assuming it wasn't full of souvenirs?
Nope. Not souvenirs, and this is where two names come in. Might recognize them. Abdelbaset al-Megrahi and Lamin Khalifa Fhimah. Libyan intelligence officers. Remember that timer fragment?
Of course, the one that pointed to a bomb.
Hmm.
But how did they connect that timer to Libya and these specific guys?
Well, experts identified it, part of an MST-13 timer, specific type used in electronics, traced its production back to a Swiss company, Mibo.
Okay, a company, but how does that lead to al-Megrahi and Fhimah?
One of the owners, Edwin Balia, he told investigators he sold a batch of those exact timers to Libya a few years earlier. And get this, he met al-Megrahi during that trip.
No way.
Oh, yeah. Said al-Megrahi and Fhimah, they were close, worked together.
This is like something out of a movie.
Yeah.
So we've got the clothes, the bag from Malta, a Libyan timer, a Libyan intelligence officer connected to that timer. What happened next?
The investigation went on years, gathering evidence across the globe. Finally, 1991, 3 years after the bombing, the U.S. and British governments issued indictments for al-Megrahi and Fhimah, charged them with the bombing of Pan Am Flight 103.
So they finally had their suspects. But Libya, under Gaddafi, they refused to extradite them, right?
Yeah.
It seemed like a dead end. How did they ever get them to trial?
It really did seem like it was over. Like they'd never be brought to justice. The families, the world, we all had to wait. It was tough knowing who was responsible, but not being able to do anything.
It's been incredibly frustrating.
Yeah.
So what changed? How did al-Megrahi and Fhimah finally face trial?
Lots of pressure, years of it, international pressure, diplomatic negotiations. Finally, in 1999, a breakthrough, kind of. Gaddafi agreed to hand them over to Scotland for trial.
Okay, that's a win, right?
Well, there was a catch. The trial couldn't be held in Scotland, or the U.S. for that matter.
Wait, seriously, why not? It happened in Scotland, surely.
But Gaddafi wouldn't have it. And the U.S., well, they lost a lot of citizens in the bombing, so they needed neutral ground, a place where everyone felt like they could get a fair trial.
A neutral ground makes sense, but where do you even find a place like that for something this big?
They found a solution. It was actually pretty amazing. Camp Zeist. It was a former U.S. Air Force base in the Netherlands.
No way.
Yeah. They built a Scottish court there on Dutch soil. Judge, lawyers, the whole thing. Scottish law in the Netherlands.
That's incredible. What about the families, though? Could they be there?
They could. The court allowed the trial to be broadcast, closed-circuit video, to the U.S., the U.K., hundreds of family members they were able to watch.
So even though it was far away, at least they could be there in a way. What was the verdict?
The trial, it was long, 9 months. All that evidence, the clothes, the bag, the timer, the connections to Loria. It was a lot to unpack. In the end, the court found Abdelbaset al-Megrahi guilty. 270 counts of murder. Life in prison.
Wow, life in prison.
Yeah.
Finally some justice, right? What about Fhimah?
He was acquitted, not enough evidence. They couldn't directly connect him to the bombing itself.
So a mixed bag for the families, bittersweet,
Mm.
but the story doesn't end there, does it? What happened to al-Megrahi? Did he actually serve life?
Not quite. He served 8 years in a Scottish prison. Then, 2009, he was diagnosed with terminal prostate cancer.
Right, that's when it got really complicated.
It did. The Scottish government decided to release him. Compassionate grounds, let him go back to Libya, be with his family.
I can only imagine how that went over.
Yeah, a lot of people were angry, especially in the U.S. They felt he should have served his full sentence. Others, though, they understood the compassion angle, even for someone who did something so terrible.
A tough situation all around. So al-Megrahi went back to Libya. How long did he have?
Not long. He died in 2012.
What a story. Intrigue, tragedy, a long fight for justice, and in the end, I guess for some, that feeling of unfinished business,
Definitely. And it didn't end there. This event, it was a wake-up call. It changed how we think about security, about terrorism.
For sure. Airport security. Totally different now than it was back then. The Lockerbie bombing, it forced everyone to wake up, to realize how vulnerable we were.
Absolutely. It was a global wake-up call. New protocols, stricter screening, intelligence sharing, everything changed.
And it wasn't just about preventing another Lockerbie. The way they investigated it, the forensic work, the cooperation between countries, it set a new standard for these kinds of investigations.
You're right. It was groundbreaking. And through it all, the families never gave up. They channeled their grief into action, became advocates for better security, demanded accountability.
They were amazing. Their strength, it's inspiring. They show the world that even after such a loss, you can keep going, keep fighting for justice, for a safer world. And, that fight continues today. The FBI, Scottish authorities, they're still investigating, still looking for answers.
It's true. Some cases, they never really close.
Today, we remember the victims of Pan Am Flight 103, their families, everyone who was touched by this tragedy. It's a reminder that even in the face of darkness, hope and resilience can prevail.
And that the pursuit of truth and justice never truly ends.
Well said. And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder the questions this event raises. How has the world changed since Lockerbie? Are we safer? What more can we do to prevent such tragedies in the future? Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.